Okay, great. How's the volume back there? Good, okay. Great, welcome to this Friday in March. Thanks for coming to our Constitution Boot Camp. Welcome to our online streamers. And Scott Bradley has left the building, apparently. Yep. Okay, one moment, actually. Let's see. Let me grab. Okay, this is our monthly Constitution Boot Camp where we seek to train those who are interested in preserving these constitutional principles in the most practical way in our communities. Defending Utah has a program where we talk about something we call committees based off the Founding Fathers' vision of committees of safety. And our goal is to learn how to self-govern in our communities and how to create community representation where we work with cities potentially if they're happy to work with us, and preserve constitutional principles. And so we have training every month on this and one-on-one training wherever you are. But as part of our program, the individuals that represent these committees is just like we hope our city and county council representatives will self-educate themselves on the Constitution. So we provide this monthly boot camp for that reason, for those who are seeking to implement the strategy. So right now we're going through the Constitution line by line. We've been doing this for a couple years now, and we're continuing with the Fifth Amendment today. So we did Fifth Amendment Deep Dive 1 last month, and we're going to continue and complete that today. So Dr. Bradley, we'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, we brought our own fan club tonight. Well, you're so kind. You're so kind. All right, are we on the air and,
We're on the air.
and every
Live.
sound? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, as it was inferred, we are partway through the Fifth Amendment, and if I really roll, we'll finish it tonight. But as you've been talking, we have gone through, the body of the Constitution, and we're halfway through the Bill of Rights when we finish tonight, and we'll have to talk about going forward too, because a lot of the amendments after the Bill of Rights are problematic, but we need to know they're there. Some of them are egregious, in fact, and written with a poison pen, even destructive of the original intent of the American Founding Fathers. And so Enoch and I will talk about that as we go forward. Maybe you could give him feedback as to how you wanted it run. But we're this far into the Fifth Amendment, where nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. So this is called the double jeopardy clause. And if you've gone through the trial process, they say you can't do it again. But before the United States was established, the king made a practice of if persons had been arrested for something and they couldn't get a conviction, and they didn't have sufficient evidence or whatever, they rearrested them and would throw them in jail while they went out looking for more evidence. And it was kind of a way the king kept a real leash on his subjects. It was kind of like if you go back and look at the body of the Constitution, Article 1, where the members of the legislature are exempted from being arrested, going to and from, and participating in their legislative process. And that was because the king used to do stuff like that to the parliament. If an issue was coming up that the king was interested in, pro or con, and he knew how someone felt about it, and it was the opposite side of what he felt about it, well, he'd just arrest him. And then when the vote was over, he'd, oh, yeah, we'll let you go. So anyway, some of these things were founded in really belligerent offenses by government, And this situation about that double jeopardy has grown out of that, because the king had a tendency to try and put people on trial for the same thing multiple times until he got a conviction, or, you know, you wore out, or whatever, you'd already died, I don't know. So they'd hoped they could find an evidence, but they just kept going through this. So the double jeopardy was included in this Bill of Rights to prevent that from happening in the United States. But there's a lot of yes, sir. Well, are you inferring that like a civil situation, like a lawsuit between two parties, or what? Right. Correct, because you're not going to be arrested for you know, I'm suing you and I'm mad at you, so you go to jail. I mean, but of course I'd never do that. But we're going to get to that in a couple of amendments about what happens with lawsuits too. But this was perhaps you've even actually had somebody sue you twice over kind of the same issue, and it, yeah.
Okay, and so the other little clause in there was had to do with life.
Yes.
So, like, then does it really apply? That's
No, it's
but life or limb sounds as though it may be interpreted as capital punishment as opposed to similar kind of prison or something.
it's all encompassing in terms of this going to prison or not. It's if you are put at risk before the law and you're going to lose your freedom or your life. And certainly that's oh, sorry about that. He's asking about, does this apply in civil law? And it really doesn't, but the inference then would be maybe, well, limb was Sharia law, and that wasn't even an issue in the United States in those days, which it shouldn't be in these days either. But it really has to do with losing your freedom or being put to death. I mean, obviously you could go that serious. But we're going to use an example here of how it applies in just a minute. So kind of hang on to that. If that doesn't kind of address it, we'll address it further. So, all right. So, but what we've got today is some very, very perverse workarounds that are being used, and they're oftentimes used between a state law and a federal law. And we're going to use an example here, and just to say a good example of a bad example is what I call it, really. And so here we have, some of you are familiar with the CEO of the insurance company United Healthcare being killed in New York here a couple of years ago. Well, a year plus. And so he was downtown. He was there for a healthcare meeting, and the inference is that the individual that did it because he was upset with the practices of this health company, and he had actually taken the health company from a very profitable position to an extremely profitable position because of the way he was running things. And it's not funny, it's a tragic commentary on America today that some people are cheering the death. And I'm not going to try and justify that in any way, shape, or form, but it's interesting how the dynamic is developing about, you know, how big business sometimes becomes abusive of people, and the individual that's alleged to have done this, and to date the trials have not been happening, and there will be trials. We'll talk about that as we go forward here. But this is kind of a backstory. Luigi was arrested in Pennsylvania a few days after it, extradited to New York. He had, now almost every article that I've read on this makes a big deal, and that's why I put it in this, that he had a 3D printed pistol and a 3D printed suppressor. And of course that makes this a much more heinous crime. And it's like, huh? It's not serialized, didn't go through the system, and all this kind of stuff. We're not talking about the Second Amendment tonight, so I'm not going to really get into that. But that's a big deal to some people because they think that somehow that needs to be contained and controlled. And I would submit to you, just in passing, that not a single one of the firearms carried by the colonists as the war was started and carried out had anything that could be serialized and tracked. Okay, they were all ghost guns. Okay, but to some people today, this is a real big thing. Okay, so we got in federal court on the 19th of December. He was arraigned in the Supreme Court, the 23rd, Supreme Court of New York. It was 11 state charges, 4 federal charges, and he pled not guilty, okay? He's this is a lot of moving parts in this, so I'm not going to try and elucidate all of the little nits and grits of some of the charges and so on, but there was initially first-degree murder, murder in the furtherance of terrorism, which obviously makes it worse. Criminal possession of a weapon, stalking. I mean, sometimes, well, anyway, they make these things up to be stack-ons, okay? So, this terrorism-related murder charges in New York case were dismissed. He's still facing second degree. They got 2 of the 4 federal charges were dismissed so that they couldn't seek the death penalty. So, there are still numerous other charges against him in both state and federal. We're not going to examine it in detail by any means, and I've probably gone into more detail than I wanted to initially right now, but I only did that so that if you weren't familiar with it, you had some kind of grasp on it. It's not going to try the case, but federal charges are tailored to the wording of federal law. And we're going to find out what the founding fathers said about that here in a moment or two. State charges are tailored to the wording in the New York state law, okay? They're aimed at essentially the same actions, essentially the same alleged crime. New York's determined that they're going to try him, and the feds are determined they're going to try him, regardless of the outcome of either one. So if he gets found guilty in the state, he's still going to go to trial for the federal or vice versa. Now, here's what St. George Tucker said. Now, if you haven't been with us before, you may not have heard me refer to this guy as the preeminent constitutional scholar of the founding era. This man was utterly, completely, and totally brilliant, and he took the Blackstone's Commentaries on the Law, the 4 volumes, which was the basis of law school in the United States. Well, it was originally the colonies even, and he attempted to tailor them to the new constitutional republic that came into effect once the United States was formulated. And he found it really couldn't be done, but he taught law, and he was just an incredible mind. The reason he wasn't at the Constitution Convention was that he was rewriting all of Virginia's laws himself, because they realized that their laws were tailored to the English form of government, and so they needed to be rewritten, and he personally took that on himself to rewrite all of Virginia's laws. So this guy was busy during the convention of 1787. So here's what St. George Tucker said, this brilliant mind that we just introduced to you. He talked about the very guarded manner in which Congress, meaning the United States Congress, are vested with authority to legislate upon the subject of crimes and misdemeanors. They are not entrusted with the general power over these subjects, but a few offenses are selected from the great mass of crimes with which society may be infested, upon which only Congress are authorized to prescribe the punishment or define the offense. All felonies and offenses committed upon land, in all cases not expressly enumerated, being reserved to the states respectively. So he's saying that the feds only have the authority to create law on the stuff that's delegated here in the United States Constitution. And so they, okay, let's talk about counterfeiting or something like that. But murder, kidnapping, rape, theft, all those kind of things are outside the purview of the general government. Okay, so he was very specific about that, and so were the founding fathers. When they created the Constitution, they delegated certain authority to the general government, and they left all the other things. And the 9th and 10th Amendment, we'll get to them someday, were very specific about that. The 9th Amendment says if you know, basically, you've still got all your rights. The 10th Amendment says they're limited right to those who are specified. So that was absolutely the position of the Founding Fathers. So you can review Constitution Article 1, Section 8 and consider for yourself, we've done that in previous sessions, what powers were delegated to Congress. Every little clause in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, can be prefaced with the words that's in Article 1, Congress shall have power to. And then it says, that's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. Okay, that's to coin money. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, to declare war. Okay, those powers and some other very specific powers like counterfeiting and so on were delegated specifically to the United States government and none else. Yes, sir. Okay, the question, okay, your question is two-part and the answer is hell no. I mean, okay, so let's just calm down a minute here. I don't want to get too, huh? Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, where's the little one? Oh, there. Oh, damn. No, I'm sorry for that. What did you want to say, or were you? Okay, it was like you're in a bidding war and you raised your hand and I thought you wanted to say something. Okay, no, it's pretty informal, no problem. Okay, your question was, Congress shall have power to declare war, or can they do it and the executive do it? And that's why I responded the way I did, because this is so passionately on our minds right now. Congress is the sole and only power that can declare war. There is no authority for the executive to take them to war. And if you read the 69th Federalist paper, I'm going to do this tonight, you'll find that the executive only carries out what the Congress delegates as the first admiral or first general, okay? There is no creative power. The executive cannot create a law, nor can the executive take the nation to war. That was clearly and unequivocally understood by the American Founding Fathers. Now, in my lifetime, and I'm older than everybody in this room, in my lifetime, we have never had a constitutionally declared war, okay? And the executive does not have that authority. And in fact, if you want to look at constitutional protocol, we're not going to get through this tonight. We're going to have to go to part 3, I can tell you right now. Anyway, if we go to the constitutional protocol of the Founding Fathers were unequivocally steeped in, was that if a power was delegated by the Constitution, ratified by the people were saying, we will be bound by laws created by these people with these limits and none else. That was constitutional protocol, and it went beyond that and said, if they didn't fulfill that law, that delegation, you cannot delegate it to anyone else. So they can't delegate it to the president. They can't delegate it through a treaty to a supranational body like NATO, CETO, CENTO, ANZUS, any of these that we've been in war with lately. It cannot be redelegated. Let's look at the tariffs, for example. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Tariffs are in the purview of the legislature. They can't delegate it to anybody. Now, you may be familiar with some laws that say, oh, we're going to do an authorization for use of military force, or we're going to do a War Powers Act, or we're going to do a tariff for emergency conditions or something. All of those are unconstitutional because there's an attempt to redelegate a power the people agreed to delegate to a certain body and none else. John Locke, probably one of the oldest, if you will, active mentors. He didn't live during the Founders era, but he specifically stated you cannot redelegate it. Jefferson, he used about 3 pages in his collected works to explain that in a little more detail. And Tucker absolutely said you cannot redelegate it. So all of these things that are happening violate the Founding Fathers' original intent. Yes, sir. absolutely correct. No, just a second. Let's stop for a second. He's talking about executive orders. George Washington issued executive orders, but it was to Thomas Jefferson to bring a report about our trade with England and France. Jefferson was tasked by the president to bring together a document that would say this is how much trade we did with England and with France and so on, okay? It was within his cabinet, and you read Article 2 and read that about that. But at no case, at any time, does the president have creative power to create laws that are enforced upon us as though they went through the Article 1, Section 1 portion that says all legislative power herein granted is held by the Congress. All legislative power. The president has zero creative power in that way. He can order within his own department and branch, and of course as the commander-in-chief, when war has been declared, he becomes the chief general or the chief admiral, okay? But he cannot creatively say, yea, verily, hereby is a law upon the United States. And it even goes deeper than that. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is absolutely prohibited from creating law that's enforced upon people because Congress claims they delegated to that executive branch department the authority to make law about firearms. No, the people didn't say we're going to be governed by a bureaucracy that's under one executive. Congress makes those laws because we can put them in and take them out. Yes, sir. The IRS is the BATFE, and so is OSHA, and so is the AP. You know, you look at all the alphabet soup organizations, and they can't do that constitutionally. Now, right now, we have an ignorant population that has been bamboozled into thinking that everything they say is law. And they have creative ways of saying, well, it's our policy. It's an administrative policy. If it's enforced, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and you know, it is a duck. And that's what these laws are doing. And
Hey,
it even
Scott?
goes farther. Yes, sir.
Oh, I wanted to add, this is a very important line of thinking, and partially the whole reason that we have these classes is this foundational principle of when is a law not a law? When is a law illegal? This is so key for our republic to function in a healthy way, because there are times when the state has to say no to the federal government, even though they passed what they claim is a law, or a county can say no to the state because they did something. And so understanding this when a power has been assumed outside of where it was originally constitutionally delegated, this is the foundation piece to understand. And as far as it goes, yeah, anything in the executive agency, you can name all these executive agencies, they're trying to pretend to write law through administrative law, which the Supreme Court is starting to push back a little bit against that, actually. I've read about that lately. But anything in the executive is only meant to pursue the laws passed by Congress.
It carries them out. It executes
Right.
the laws. That's
Yeah.
what it's the executive branch, okay? And the big problem is right now, somebody will shoot you if you disagree. We need a lot more friends. And let me just tell you a little bit. In the back of your, if you've got one of these little pocket constitutions, you'll find that there's some very germane things about the purpose of government. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they're created and endowed by their creator, so there's a God in there, with certain inalienable rights. It mentions a few, and then it says it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. That's what the legislature is supposed to be doing. Well, at any rate, then after they've done their introductory remarks, and then they put some closing, you know, bring it in to lasso it all together, there's 27 offenses that were committed by the king that they're saying these are justification to why we're going to blood, okay? So there's your introductory paragraphs, your closing paragraphs, and then there's 27 offenses in the middle. Offense number 13, okay, this is an offense the king did. We're justifying our action by this. It says he has combined, and it's pointed at the king, with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. This was what happens when they're in violation of the Constitution. The people today that are stepping over their legally oath-taken bounds are trying to inflict upon us things that are foreign to our Constitution, okay? But, and not but, it's and, it's comma and. Okay, let me start over with this clause. His offense, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, comma, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. See, if people are creating legislation outside of their oath-taking bounds, and you're going to find almost nobody that will agree with this, but it is foundational. The Declaration was the basis of what we carried forth from there. And so pretended legislation that was just referred to is what we're all living under. And quite frankly, we probably have 10 times more laws that are treated as laws than we have real laws. They create and adjudicate and they enforce. And boy, I wish there was time. I wish some of you had been here some time ago when we talked about some of these real recent violations in the Utah state. The state of Utah has created some egregious organizations that really are judge, jury, and hangman. And we're going to see, if we get to it, maybe tonight, maybe next time, what the Utah Constitution actually says about that. It says you can't violate the Constitution. Unless it says it, you can't do it. And here in 2020, in the spring of 2020, so it was 6 years ago, the Utah legislature met and gave the governor legislative authority because of this pandemic that we had, this COVID-con that was sweeping over us, a bad cold that everybody got shut down on, sent home and couldn't do any, oh man. Anyway, the governor was, and the Constitution of Utah specifically says you cannot have the executive branch carry out the legislative branch, but the legislature delegated it unconstitutionally to the governor to do that. And it's under the continuity of government clause in the Utah Constitution, and the continuity of government clause specifically says you can't do that, but they did it anyway. So these people are really rash. I'm trying to not use bad words. Anyway, I did a couple of hours of radio this morning that, you know, it's a program we do on radio, and then they do different segments of it as part of television broadcasting. Nobody in Utah carries it. You have to have internet to get it, but it's around the whole country. It's a syndicated program. But at any rate, I always have to chew my tongue a little bit. I'll use the term sometimes Bravo Sierra. I was a ground radio guy when I was in the military, and we spoke in the phonetic alphabet, and I'll leave you to your translation, okay? I call Bravo Sierra on this, is sometimes what I say. So just if I use that term, you don't have to go. Don't spend too much time thinking about it. It comes pretty easily. Okay, so Congress, Article 1, Section 8 says Congress shall have power to, go read it. It's very specific. And if you read Clause 18, a lot of people say that is an elastic clause, is what they call it. And no, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say it has power to do all the other things it wants to do. It says it has the power to carry out the powers delegated herein. So if you have the power delegated in there, you have the power to carry it out. But you can't come up with a law that tells us how many shoelace holes we have to have, or what color they got to be, or whether we have picket fences or blue houses or whatever. It's not delegated to the general government. The 9th and 10th Amendments are very careful to protect those things. Okay, we've covered all of these things in some previous sessions, but it's very nice to do a catch-up sometime, as long as Enoch doesn't get mad at me for not finishing tonight. And he might, because I told him we were going to do the Fifth Amendment in 2 classes. There's no way in the world we're going to get through it, unless I just play these and you guys can kind of catch up as you go. Anyway. Yeah, I'm giving him fair warning is what I'm doing. And if you guys agree, we'll do it that way. Okay, so Congress really only has specific powers. Most of them are enumerated. I know there's a lot of people that are very, very adamant that if it isn't in Article 1, Section 8, Congress does not have that power. That's not true. You can go read Article 4, Section 4. My wife's going out to get me a drink, and I hope it's a little stronger than something. No. I've told you guys about my grandma and her cough syrup, haven't I? Yeah. Anyway, we don't have that, by the way. Anyway, so Article 1, Section 8 is not the entirety of Congress's power. They have other powers too, like to articles of impeachment, or to carry those articles out as a trial with the Senate. That's earlier in the Constitution. A disposal of nationally owned lands, Article 4, Section 4. So they have some other things that people oftentimes overlook. Thank you, girl. Could you open it, please? Wow, that's so kind. I think I'll keep her. I have to remind her occasionally. I have been talking a lot today. Okay, so remember, Article 1, Section 1 grants the sole and only power to the general government to have legislation. That's the only constitutionally created law. Bureaus, alphabet soups, whatever, the president, as you point out in executive orders, can't do that and create law. And that's why, and I'm going to just have to keep walking on this a little bit, when Trump came out and announced these tariffs unilaterally and arbitrarily, I said, wait a minute, wait, let's go back and look at Article 1, Section 8. He does not have the authority to do tariffs. And I said from the very get-go on that if the Supreme Court rules according to the plain English words of the Constitution, they're going to rule against him. Unless they walk a razor blade and they try and do a finely adjusted something to give him wiggle room. That's what they did. They said, oh, you used this law that Congress made so that you can do tariffs wrong, but if you tried this other way, we might look at it again. I mean, I'm being a little bit cavalier about that, but that's exactly what they did. Consequently, he immediately pivoted and said, oh, that's the one I'm going to use. Now there's 24 states, most of the biggest states in the Union, that have filed lawsuits to be taken to the Supreme Court about the abuse of that. And the whole plain English wording of it is in the Constitution that we could read them in less than a sentence and we could fix this if Congress had a backbone. And if you read the 51st Federalist Paper and the 47th Federalist Paper, you would find that Congress has to grow a backbone. They're responsible, okay? If they don't do it, it's going to be a problem, and it is a problem. We've got a problem right now. We've got a war going on that pray that it does not metastasize into something horrid. I remember the days we were losing 300, 400, 500 Americans every week in Vietnam on an undeclared war. In 1968, we lost just under 19,000 men on an undeclared war in 1968. It cost Lyndon Johnson the presidency, but we didn't stop the problem. Anyway, I'm getting far afield. I told you that I got distracted by shiny objects. Okay. So the only one that can create law is Congress. Okay. Says this, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That's what the plain English words say, all legislative powers, House and Senate. Not occasionally the president can, or kind of if he wanted to do it, if he wanted to back into it this way. No, all. It's pretty inclusive. Okay, so we ask you, how does this trial? Okay, that's in Article 1, Section 8 again. Naturalization is the Congress's responsibility. The president carries out that law. And I think that it was unenforced for so long that we got in a real mess, and now it's being enforced. And we're in a real mess because we've let it go to probably 50 million illegals in the country at this point. Do you know what a huge percentage that is of our whole population? That's 1 out of 7 is here illegally. Holy Hannah. Anyway, so yeah, that's Congress's responsibility, and then the president executes the law. Okay. It's a real hard case we've built ourselves at this point, and we've got to bring it back. Did you have a comment? Okay, well, okay. Last summer, in case you hadn't heard about this, I'm going to restate the case without restating the exact question. Last summer, Donald Trump invited 600,000 communist Chinese students to come to the United States. And he thought he'd cut a fat hog with Xi Jinping. Now, I don't know what the deal actually was, but he says, we're bringing 600,000 military-aged students to the United States. Do the math. Fifth grade math, you've heard that, Okay, divide 50 into 600,000. That's 12,000 students per state if they were divided evenly, which they probably won't be, but let's just say that because we don't know how they're being divided out. But let's say Utah has 12 institutions of higher learning. That's pretty close to what it is. I'm doing the math that a fifth grader can do. That means 1,000 per university. And again, we don't know exactly how this will be divided up. But if you had 1,000 communist Chinese military-aged individuals brought into each one of those institutions, Utah State University, Weber, University of Utah, SUU, all of these, UVU, you look at Salt Lake Community College, all of this, that's 1,000 per. Now let's put this in a, what if they were trained to respond in the event that they were told to? And what if we got in a war with Iran? Wait a minute, we have. What if Iran had as one of its closest buddies China? And what if it really went upside down and backwards and the Chinese students that were in all of these places got the phone call or the beeper or whatever it's on, it's time to go to action. And then they went to our inland port locations where we don't inspect the containers, there may be craters someday, the containers that are brought in, and let's say they have RPGs and some kind of C4 type devices and AK-47s and, you get the idea. And they got on their horses and went out and did their job. A rocket propelled grenade. And they have different flavors, and we could get into that if you wanted to, but yeah, there's something you can project a grenade with force, and they have a formed charge that actually can penetrate a lot of armor and sandbags and stuff like that. They go through cinder block like it doesn't exist. So anyway, let's say all that happened. And again, this is all what ifs, but let's remember, those that are unwilling to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Santayana said that in his Life of Reason, Volume 1, by the way. We'll have to review that sometime if you're interested, but probably not. But anyway, if we don't learn from the lessons of the past. Now, what happened in 1968 when the Chinese Lunar New Year happened? Tet. There was a thing called Tet Offensive. 80,000 communist troops got the signal. They launched attacks all across Southeast Asia, Vietnam. The first week, I think we lost nearly 250 Americans, trained military personnel, armed, in country, and they had a heyday. That 1968 was a bad year. That's when things really got flipped in our egos and everything else like that. But the point of the matter is, those 80,000 troops that got the word, launched on the same day, the same time, and carried out havoc. Down on the Delta, the Mekong Delta, that's the southernmost where the river comes out, and kind of like the Mississippi Delta, think about that. There's a little town, village, no, it's bigger than a village, it's bigger than a town. It's not a full metropolitan area, but it's called Bonthrea. And the Army major that gave the briefing when it was finally taken back said it became necessary to destroy the town to save it. That's pretty bad. The patient died, but we kept the cancer from spreading. You know. Anyway, so that kind of stuff has happened. And when the United States on D-Day, June 6, 1944, total, whether it's paratroopers or amphibious landings or whatever, we put boots on the ground in Europe, 160,000 troops. 160,000. Now remember, the Chinese have got 600,000 here now, but those 160,000 guys that landed came to take back Europe. And they weren't going home until they got done. And it proved out that way. It took about a year and a half to have happen. Year and 3/4. But at any rate, no, it wasn't quite even a year. It was June 6, 1944, and it was done at the end of spring. Yeah, 1945. Yeah. A lot of bad stuff happened in the middle. But the fact of the matter is, 160,000, of course, we kept reinforcing them. It's just astounding to me what they can do. If you had sappers or you had these sleeper cells or whatever, most people don't know that there's several, we used to call it, when I was in, command, control, and communication. And the communication things are very, very essential. And all of the things that we rely on in our society today, water supplies, electronics or electricity, communication stuff, our transportation things, transportation hubs, for example, all of those things, they don't have to come to every house to wreak havoc. They can come to clustered kinds of things that bad stuff can happen. And we hope and pray it never, never, never happens. But the point of the matter is, could it happen? Could these Chinese be something more than just students that wanted to learn how to do good math in the United States? It's possible. And could it be that, well, Iran and China are pretty good buddies right now, and Iran gets a lot of their stuff from China, and a lot of people are saying, we are hurting China by hurting Iran, but it reciprocates sometimes. So there are some things that might really, really, really be a bad situation. And most Americans never think about these kinds of things, so we never faced it in our country. The last guys I knew that, go ahead. I doubt that very much. I doubt we have sleeper cells. The question was, do we have sleeper cells in China? And honestly, let me, okay, that's a good question, but I don't think normally we operate that nefariously, okay? But I do believe we, at this very moment, have boots on the ground in Iran. And we have had for some time, months probably. Boots on the ground, and I can, let's say I knew people that did this years before the Vietnam War heated up. We had them in Iraq, we had them in Syria, and what they were doing was they were identifying targets. And then they called in strikes. And ultimately and finally, I mean, almost all of the strikes, now we're doing a lot of them from satellite and from aerial observation now, but you can do it the old-fashioned way and say, here we have these coordinates. How many of you saw the movie Clear and Present Danger? You got the book too, Tom Clancy? Yeah. Okay, you need to go home and watch that tonight. A president declares his own war against a drug lord. Oh, wait a minute, did Madrell, was he playing? No, that wasn't. It was in Colombia. Sometimes I have to play the Columbo card in case you never saw that movie. We'll have to explain it sometime for you. But special operators went in after this drug lord because the president had heartburn because this drug lord had killed one of his close friends and left his family out at sea, you know, when their yacht got taken over by the druggies. And he called a war, and he sent in special operators. One of the things they did is they were going to blow up the cartels, and so the special operators had a device that painted the yellow truck, if I recall it was yellow, with a signal that an airstrike was made against. You guys got to go home and watch this. It's almost like you can't make this stuff up. Yes, ma'am.
What's a sleeper cell?
There's somebody that's in a what's a sleeper cell is the question for those back in the home world. They're individuals that have a pre-assigned task, perhaps, or maybe they're just individuals that are there as a hostile force, but they're living under the covers, so to speak. They're kind of like a spy, but they're actually more of an activist group that ultimately, if they got activated, could go out and blow up bridges or cell towers or water supply systems or electric infrastructure on substations, any of those kind of things. And so when they get activated, they come in and do their job. And honestly, if you had 10 people, they could take out Power Substation in all of Cache Valley. 10 others in Salt Lake Valley could probably take out something on the East Bench because they know where to place charges, for example. And so it's a common thing with military, and what we have in Iran and have had for some period of time, boots on the ground, I'm certain, for forward observer kinds of things, that they were picking targets and then they call in strikes on them. And they say, I know these guys are hiding something here, let's call in a strike. And like in that movie, Clear and Present Danger, they paint the target and they send in a missile, and it's very accurate. They're laser-guided missiles. So anyway, boy, we've blown this one all apart. One boom. They killed off the top 40 leaders. Somebody knew where they were camped out. It wasn't camped. They were sitting in their office probably. Okay. Correct. They're absolutely devastating, and people that do the you know, kind of, they go in and they identify critical things that need to happen if you're going to take over. And we're silly to not think that could not be happening here, because we have offended so many people around the world that there's going to be blowback. I mean, I don't want to sound doomsday-ish, but we've done some pretty nefarious things, and we will in the future. So, yes, ma'am.
So, how does this kind of
Tie back in?
circle back?
You're bringing me back to the subject? Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so here's the deal. In his particular trial, there are federal charges for the actions he took. And the charges are tailored to the way the federal laws have been written. But as we read what Tucker said, they cannot write law about murder, for example. They don't have any authority to write law about murder. But the state also has authority to write law about murder. And the state did. But both of them are going to charge him. And there's an argument about, is it double jeopardy? And Luigi's attorneys are saying, wait, this is double jeopardy. And the feds are saying, no, it's not.
Did the federal government write laws in the interim?
No. Well, since the founding of the nation, they've written lots of laws.
Right.
But since he killed them, no. These laws have been enforced. They're pretend laws that the federal government doesn't have any authority to create. So they wrote, just like in the Declaration of Independence, in that the 13th clause, it says they've subjected this to pretended law. Well, that's what the general government is doing right now. So they've created tons of laws that were not delegated authority, and we're having them enforced upon us as though they were law. And we believe it. We act like it. You know, this sounds a little, shall I say, arrogant on my part, perhaps, which probably is a good description. I was up in a canyon cross-country skiing one day. And I'm going past this sign, and it had written on the sign, it's a federal offense to deface this sign. And as I went past it, I muttered, so what? That doesn't mean I'm going to go deface the sign. It doesn't mean I have any intent whatsoever to do that, but everything has a federal corollary law associated with it. And this idea that they can make it a federal law to paint over that sign or to scratch it with my pocket knife or whatever is now a federal offense. It's just this absurd. And I think about when I was a kid. I know you're going to think I grew up when Wyatt Earp was the sheriff or something, but we used to bring guns to school all the time. We put them in the back of our vehicle, or maybe hung them in the window if we had a pickup truck. I didn't have a pickup truck. And we used them, we might have gone out duck hunting before school, and we brought them in. I always kept mine in my locker, but some guys took them to the principal's office and gave it to them to watch, but I always just kept mine in my locker. And it wasn't a federal offense, and nobody brought them to shoot anybody. You were going to go shoot rabbits after school, or we shot ducks before school. And I'm sorry about that. But that's the way we were, murderous critters. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway, the fact of the matter was, there was one guy that at high school brought a pistol to sell to another kid. And they were standing there at the locker, looking at this pistol, and some teacher walks up and he says, "What's you doing?" Kid says, "I'm thinking about buying this pistol." So the teacher says, "Let me see it." And he looks at it and he works the action and all that kind of stuff. And he says to the other kid, "Are you going to sell it to him?" And, "I don't know, maybe." He says, "Are you going to buy it?" He says, "I don't know, maybe." He says, "Well, if he doesn't, I will." I mean, it was not a big deal. I mean, it was the way life was. We had shooting ranges in school, and nowadays it's federal offense to do anything. I mean, it's just bizarre. Anyway, that's where this ties back in. This guy that killed the guy, probably, in New York, that has not been convicted, so it's an alleged crime at this moment, but he will be tried for that offense by the state, that offense from the feds. And the point is that the Congress didn't have the right to create those laws. So this double jeopardy thing is, they're scooching it around. Remember, we're in the Fifth Amendment. No double jeopardy. Can't be put at risk, life and limb, for the same thing. That was to prevent what the king was doing. We're doing it here. Our state governments are trying them, and our federal guys are trying them. Okay? So that was just a good example of a bad example of where we've overstepped the bounds and we got way sidetracked. I'm sorry. You're probably never going to visit again because of this. But and the double jeopardy clause in the Fifth Amendment. That's the question we have. Is this a violation of that? And I think we really need to think about that really hard, the way we handle things in our legislatures, our legislature at the national level. It doesn't hesitate for a moment, just like our president doesn't hesitate for a moment, to create law unconstitutionally, if they so desire. Are your little people falling asleep? Oh. Okay. Okay, so we're moving on. Woo! One little half a sentence in this thing. And we're only an hour into it.
Learning good stuff.
Yeah, well, I hope that there's some value in this. And correlating it all together, you're going to have to bring us back to the point again as I get too far afield.
Well, I do have another question.
I hope so.
You said earlier that 2 federal charges were dropped.
In the pretrial stuff that was happening.
So what were the 2 federal charges?
They dropped some things that reduced. They probably dropped a terrorist thing from the feds. I don't remember the exact thing. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of charges, a lot of motions that have been made in court. And I says, I'm not going to try this today in our discussion, but there was 4 federal charges. They dropped 2 of them, which prevented the death penalty from being on the table. But the feds still have some murder charges against him that they're going to, in my opinion, replicate when the state tries him for murder. Okay, a similar type thing will happen with the guy that's accused of killing Charlie Kirk, because the feds are going to do some stuff, but we don't know how far down they're going to go on that. The state trial is already moving ahead, but the feds will likely pick it up at some point and do a similar type thing. It happens all the time. And I saw one case one time where a guy shot 2 black men and killed them and was, well, that's my opinion about what happened. I wasn't in the trial, but he was acquitted. But so the state, I mean, the feds picked up civil rights violations. They didn't want to, oh, no, it's the same thing, but it's civil rights violation. Killing them was civil rights violation, and they convicted him on it. So they take the same event, and the feds try it, and the state tries it. And I think there's a compelling story that can be made about how number one, they're violating the Constitution in their delegated authority for law, based upon what Tucker said, and they're also violating the double jeopardy thing that's in the Fifth Amendment. So these things need to be revisited. You and I are not going to resolve them tonight, but we need to start thinking about the constraints that were placed upon governments whose purpose is to preserve God-given rights. That's what the Declaration of Independence says, okay? Our God-given rights are not to be infringed. And you can go back to that as kind of the promise that was made, and the Constitution delivered that promise, okay? And I hope it doesn't sound too complex that people get discouraged, but we really do need to get an educated body of legislators that are trying to recognize what their duty really is. And my personal opinion is that our congressional district from this state are empty suits. They're a sure vote for the establishment. That's all they do. I mean, what have they done? Oh, they passed the big, beautiful bill, which is a violation of common sense, if nothing else. Because you pack everything into one big bill, and everybody says, hey, I got something in there, I'm voting for it. I got something in there, I'm voting for it. And pretty soon, everybody got something they wanted, and it's all passed. And it's a perversion. Okay, we're going on with the Fifth Amendment to the next little partial phrase. Nor shall they be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against themselves. So you're not required to be a witness. I'm taking the fifth. That's how you most often, that doesn't mean you're going to drink it. What it means is you're going to not incriminate yourself. I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that it may incriminate me. That's what you hear sometimes taken when Perry Mason's on. You guys probably haven't even heard of Perry Mason. Fact of the matter is, I don't know if I'd admit it. Huh? Oh, Perry Mason wasn't bad. It was just old. It was. It was good for what it did. In a half an hour, they resolved the most intriguing cases, didn't they? Okay, so you can't be compelled to witness against yourself. Okay? And this covers a lot of things. If you get taken in and get tortured, like waterboarded, until you say, I did it, just tell me what you want me to say, I'll say I did it, you know? And that's one of the reasons that torture doesn't work. And by the way, where was that originated? Just for the fun of it. It was originated in the Philippines insurrection during the early days of the 1900s. The United States violated the Philippines by taking them over when we got them back when we didn't get them back, but we broke them off the Spanish and took them as one of our pieces of ground. And when there was people saying, no, we want to be free, well, they went in and U.S. forces waterboarded 5,000 tribal leaders. 3,000 of them died. And then when the Japanese did it on American people in World War II, they were accused of and convicted of war crimes. It's a tragic, tragic kind of thing. We get what goes around. Anyway, Fifth Amendment says you can't be compelled in any criminal cases to be a witness against yourself. Okay, so you can't. It's just they didn't want people to be tortured or whatever to say it and then put them in jail for it. Well, it's interesting to me that in ancient Israel, there was a similar protection in their judicial code. Yeah. This has been around for thousands of years. Here's a citation for it, and you'll have fun finding it if you ever go look for it. But it says, we have as a fundamental principle of our jurisprudence that no one can bring an accusation against himself. Should a man make confession of guilt before a legally constituted tribunal, such confession is not to be used against him unless properly attested by 2 other witnesses. Okay, so they say you can't be compelled, and you even can't even testify against yourself. Here's another source. Not only is self-condemnation never extorted, meaning by force, we're going to get this guy to say something, from the defendant by means of torture, but no attempt is ever made to lead him onto self-incrimination. We're going to use a good example of a bad example in a minute, where the Savior's trial was held and self-incrimination happened, or he wouldn't have been found guilty, by the way. But the chief judge, this guy named Caiaphas, put him under oath and had him testify against himself. Now, and Jesus gave it because he knew they didn't have a case anyway. Everything they were accusing him, blasphemy. How is he guilty of blasphemy against himself? I mean, come on. Anyway, we're getting in logical circles here. Okay, no attempt is ever made to lead him on to self-incrimination. Moreover, a voluntary confession on his part is not admitted into evidence and therefore not competent to convict him unless a legal number of witnesses minutely corroborate his self-accusation. So the ancient Israelites, not the modern state of Israel, the ancient Israelites had this as a rule that they had to run their courts on. So this is what happened when the Savior was brought before the tribunal and was convicted of blasphemy. And it was illegal, and it could not be used against him, but they did it anyway. They weren't supposed to meet at night. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. If you look at the trial of Jesus, it's almost as tragic as the juries and the trial systems that we have in America today. Okay, so Caiaphas, in violation of this prohibition of requiring a person to testify in his own case, except voluntarily and of his own initiative, demanded an answer from Jesus, and he exercised his prerogative of his office and put Jesus under oath as a witness before the court. So we have a couple things out of the scriptures. I'll just read you here in Matthew 26. But Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I jure. Well, now, I put in parentheses in the bold there. What does a jure mean? Does that mean we're going to adjourn or what? No. It means I bind or command on oath or under the penalty of a curse to charge on the pain of God's wrath. So he put him under a firm judicial responsibility to answer this as if he were under oath. Okay? I adjure thee by the living God that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said, and meaning, I am what you just said. Okay? Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, which is another interesting path we could take. We're not going to. Saying, He hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What ye think ye? They answered and said, He's guilty of death. That means we should kill him for it. Okay? So he put him under that oath as the high priest in their judicial setting and said, okay, now all of you guys are witnesses. He blasphemed, so we're okay to put him to death. Okay? So it was kind of a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy thing. If all the people that were sitting there heard the blasphemy, well, I guess we got enough witnesses here. Okay, so let's go to Mark 14 and say, But he held his peace and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him and said unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes and saith, What need we any further witnesses? Because you all heard it, you know. Now you guys can say, I can testify now that he blasphemed. Ye have heard the blasphemy. What think ye? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. Okay. Now, these self-incriminating things were prohibited in ancient Israel and in modern America. This is older than dirt, thousands of years old. This idea of not bringing people tortured and not going on with that self-incrimination statement. Now, there's an interesting, this is kind of an unrelated side note, and I can tell you've already been bored to death with unrelated side notes, but this is important to think about. Scoundrels intent on obtaining a conviction are willing to obtain them regardless of truth. Okay, now some of us are quite aware of some of the things that happened to the January 6 people, for example, and how they were railroaded and sentenced to extremely long sentences. I know one guy, I've spoken at the same meeting with him once. I don't really know him personally. He wasn't even in Washington, D.C. when that happened. He was in another state, and they sentenced him, I think, to 15 or 18 years. Because that's the Wizard of Oz, right? It's wishful thinking, and they did it. The Munchkins are all there. Okay, so after the Jewish tribunal convicted Jesus of blasphemy, which is a capital crime under their laws, this is one you get put to death for. We're going to go stone you if you're blasphemous. Okay, that was their conviction. Now, they were determined to have the conviction carried out under Roman hand. They wanted to be able to say, talk to Pilate if you got a problem with this. You know, they didn't want to take the blame. Oh, the blame be upon us and our posterity. Oh, no, they did say that, didn't they? Anyway, boy, I get so many smart aleck comments in sometimes. But they convicted him of blasphemy, okay, which is a capital crime, meaning they put to death. But they modified the crime to sedition when they presented their case to Pilate. And that was a capital crime under Roman law. Now, you can carry this a little bit further, and when he says, okay, I can let one guy go at this Passover time, just as a wink and a nod to, you know, being good guys in your country. Do you want Barabbas set loose, or do you want Jesus set loose? Barabbas was actually convicted of that sedition that they changed the crime to. And the people, after they got consulted with the priests, said, we want Barabbas. Barabbas got turned loose. So these people that are determined to get, yes? It's basically a treasonous kind of act. You're kind of trying to overthrow the government. Okay? So did we hear anything about this on the January 6th stuff that was going on? I think we did. There's all sorts of things. And by the way, treason is defined in the United States Constitution in Article 3. It's very specific. And so many of us that love the Constitution often say, that's treason, they ought to be put to death. Well, get your Constitution out and read Article 3. They define treason very specifically. And it's a very, very narrow definition, and it is rarely the case, even though we might want it to be because it's a capital offense if it happens here in this country. But some of us use the term incorrectly. And well, man, I can see everybody looking it up, and I better make a little comment about it just so you don't feel like that I'm not, whoops, I'm over here in the Declaration of Independence still. Okay, so go to Article 3, Section 3. And this is not a class on judicial clause that, or the article that creates the judiciary. Article 3, Section 3 says treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, so levying war against the states, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses, which we saw in the Jewish law here a little while ago, a testimony of two witnesses as to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Okay, so treason is narrowly defined. Levying war against the states or adhering to their enemies, give them aid and comfort. I would submit that the case could be made that Lincoln levied war against the states, and we don't need to go down that path. But that seems to me like the idea they had. If you're warring against states, it's a bad thing. That's treasonous. So anyway, sedition, treason, all those kind of things are kind of closely related. We have not had very many cases in the whole history of the United States where these have been exercised. Okay, net going on. We might get through well, no, it doesn't fit that particular thing, but there's plenty of child molestation laws. Pizzagate that you're referring to has to do with
Oh, I'm sorry. What I'm talking about is and Adam Schiff and the whole thing against Trump. They're trying to get Trump after trying to remove him from office.
Okay, so you're referring to the stuff like the Russia stuff, and the accusations, and it was the Steele dossier that brought that about. The Steele dossier was a complete fabrication. It was orchestrated by the Democratic National Committee, and it was purchased from an individual that fabricated it. The FBI agents that were involved in it got suborned action from the court because they lied to the court. Okay, they got some accusations there that were carried out against some of the people, and they tried to remove Trump from office. But it doesn't qualify to treason because it was not waging war against the nation. I'll just give you an example that may even offend you even more. Back in my day, when I was young, anyway, Jane Fonda went to Hanoi. And she sat on and maybe even fired. We don't know for sure if she fired at American Aircraft, but she was on anti-aircraft equipment. And she did some really dastardly things. When Americans tried to give her information as they shook hands with her that were American POWs, she turned that information over to their American captors. Virtually all of them were tortured more, and some died. But because we did not have a declaration of war, the courts have ruled you can't bring treason charges against her. Okay, so I'm not fond of Jane, but that doesn't make her a traitor in the sense that the Constitution defines. Okay, that's exactly right. So what is she, about 86 now, something like that? I think, you know, she even got old, didn't she? She was old a lot of time. But anyway, okay, so it's really narrowly defined. And there are people that have tried to say that what the Congress did in certifying the election that, you know, put Joe Biden in, they've said that was treasonous, but it doesn't meet the treasonous definition that's in Article 3 of the Constitution. So it's a very, very strictly held definition, and it's been very rarely that something like that has been handed out. Okay, so yes, ma'am.
So going back to the being compelled to be a witness against yourself, right?
Yeah.
How does that work, or does it only mean if you're on trial, you cannot be a witness against yourself?
No.
What if, in the course of the investigation, you are being lied to compel a specific answer from you? Would that fall under this?
I think it's really, really a suspect answer. And here the question is for those out in the network. There's a lot of lying that goes on against people when they're accused. Well, we know you did this. I mean, come on. I mean, your brother said you did it. I mean, he's testifying against you. Why don't you just tell us? We'll go easier on you. You know, stuff like that. And so that's a coercive kind of thing that is manipulative, and it's dishonest, and I believe that should not happen either. But it's one of those things where if you're just sitting there and you say, all right, okay, I did it, okay, and they didn't compel you to, then it can be used against you. Okay, but the idea is to prevent a tortured confession or something that is manipulated, and what you're talking about, in my opinion, is manipulated. But they do it all the time. They do it all the time. Sure. Well, here's where the Russia thing was a they made perjured statements to the FISA court, and they said this document we are confident in our investigations are true, and therefore we need these warrants issued, for example. So then the perjury laws could be brought into effect. But you know what? These guys have every trick in the trade down, and it's like they're going to get a conviction regardless of what they have to do. But that particular case has been found to be falsely based, and there were some people that had some real problems with it because they came under real suspicion and it hurt their lives and everything else like that. But they weren't executed, so they weren't put to death under some kind of treason thing. But the perjury thing about how the FBI, they should be pursued. My position would be that the FBI agents that perjured themselves in the obtaining of warrants, they should be pursued for perjury and they should suffer the full extent of the law. I don't know, 5 years in jail, I don't know what they're going to do or could do. Okay, let's move on. About no person be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, so due process has to do with judicial review. And part of the problem that is related to this is the way, let's just take these administrative warrants that are given. They do not go before a Article 3, a constitutionally created judgeship. They don't go before an Article 3 judge. They go through administrators, and they get these administrators to sign off on a administrative warrant. So they go kick somebody's door in and they drag them out to be deported. Or they go to somebody's door with an administrative warrant that says, we have a warrant that you've got to turn all your guns over to us. The red flag laws. And these are not having a true review. Now, there's problems even if you do go before a regular judge for the red flag laws. They usually pick a judge that's anti-gun, and it's an ex parte hearing, meaning your accuser is the only one there in the room. Okay. It might be a police officer or some kind of said, hey, this guy's girlfriend said he's suicidal. We ought to pick up his guns. And the judge goes, oh, he's going to kill himself or maybe harm someone else. Let's pick up his guns. You're not there. Your attorney's not there. Ex parte meaning it's a one-sided argument. There's nobody there to defend you. You don't even know what's happening. So they show up at 4 o'clock in the morning when you're in your jammies. You answer the door, they say, we're here to pick up your guns, and they say, the heck you say, and you go to grab your 6-shooter that's on the table, and they say, he went for a gun and we had to shoot him. And that's happened. It literally has happened that way. Those ex parte hearings, and particularly with administrative warrants, and the ICE people are using administrative warrants, and I think that the Democrats that are seeking changes in the way ICE does things have got a real point when they say administrative warrants should not be acceptable. And people that are really for the ICE people doing their job and taking the bad guys or the illegals out need to stop and think about, if you like administrative warrants now, will you like them when they're used against you? We've just got to toe the line. It's got to be down the path, and we can't overstep that. Okay, so this one, Enoch, when were we supposed to stop? Oh, okay, I got 40 minutes left. Only got 97 slides left. But I will break the news to you right now. If it's okay, we'll do another session next time. Okay, so you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. That means that it has to be adjudicated. I just can't come in and say, yea, verily, here it is, we're taking your property. Okay, well, we're going to look at a case that's a good example of a bad example in a minute, and the Supreme Court upheld it. Okay, so we'll look at that just momentarily. But this due process was to protect your life, liberty, or property from arbitrary heavy-handedness by government. Okay, so you get to have this full and fair hearing to review the matter to ensure fairness. It just can't be a city council that says, oh man, we need that plot of ground. Well, in Utah, I'm not so sure it can't be done sometimes. But at any rate, according to the Utah legislature. Okay, so historically, the judicial branch was called in to review and adjudicate the matters, but the recent practice is often, as the organization, for example, a department of an executive branch that makes the decision. Now, we can talk about some of the examples like the IRS that you brought out earlier. If they decide they're going to take something, they do it on a kind of an administrative thing. Oh, we've got this policy. We get to take your property. Whoa, I want to appeal that. Okay, go down to the next door in the IRS hallway, and they'll hear your case. No, wait a minute, I want a real judge. Oh no, you've got to go through our process before, and if you lose, you can take it to a real judge.
Hey, Scott,
Yes, sir.
I want to share an example that, OSHA, there's a Utah version of OSHA that does workforce enforcement of, healthy workplaces. And I remember during the lockdowns, when we were helping businesses respond, that would call us and ask us questions for help. We studied what's the name of the agency in Utah? The Utah's OSHA?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's a UOSH or something like
Yeah.
that.
So, okay. Anyway, so they're going to companies saying, we noticed you were letting your employees not wear masks, right? Or things like that.
The public health department did a lot of that too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This was particularly Utah's OSHA. And when we looked at the fines, like the legal documents they were giving them, at the very bottom, the conclusion to all, they would cite all these codes, and it's some kind of administrative law that's in their policy.
Yeah.
At the very bottom, the conclusion said suggested fine. Suggested. So it's like the whole legal framework was built around, well, we were just asking if you
It's-
wanted it, but like they knew it was not enforceable. And so it's like the fear of the pretend legislation, right? They enforce it through fear and illusion sometimes. Just
Everything that happened during the COVID con was squishy. I went to our sheriff, for example, and, of course, we weren't wearing masks, and said to the sheriff, okay, these masking laws and these things about walking up and down the aisle of Walmart in a certain direction and the idea of 6-foot spacing and everything like that, what are you going to do about that? He said, well, I'm going to enforce the law. I says, I'm interested in that law. Can you get it out and let me review that law with you sitting here? It kind of looked like the fish you took out and they were doing this as they were put on the bank, I said, I'd like to know the actual law, give me the chapter and verse, if you will, the 6.7.2.3-4 or whatever. I had to make that up because there isn't such a thing. And he says, well, I'm going to enforce the law. I said, well, tell me what the law is. What is it going to say on the ticket that I get? And there isn't anything. And it really was based on fear and doubt. By the way, we're in that mode right this very minute. If you believe the shills that are on the TV that are selling this war to you, you're being lied to every bit as much as you were lied to during the COVID con. Safe and effective, a godsend, whatever. Oh, we've all got to be studied and tested and all this kind of. And they're just selling you a bill of goods again. And it worked pretty good for them, and they're doing it again right now. And I spend a lot of time watching news feeds, don't I? And I get so if I didn't own the TV myself, I would probably throw a shoe through it, because I get so sick and tired of being lied to. I hate to be lied to, but it's lies, lies, and more darn lies. And Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi propaganda minister, roughly translated, he says, if you tell a lie big enough, often enough, it becomes truth. And that's exactly what's happened to us normally in our circumstances here in America. Some of us have a saying that if it has not been denied in an official press conference, then you can't say it's true. And so, anyway, if we seem rather disgusted with what's going on, it's because I am, truly. Okay, let's just take a couple of examples about a law, and I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but we have those administrative law things that happen with the IRS and the ATFE and the health department and all these kinds of things. And really, what happens with a lot of those, they say we're going to, you know, charge you with violation of this, whatever. And well, I don't agree. I should be. I'm going to take it to court. Oh well, okay. Come down and have a little hearing with our guy down the hallway here. Well, no, I want to go take it to a court. Oh no, you've got to take it through our process first. And then after we've drained you of all the money you've got, and you've brought your attorney 6 times, and you can no longer afford it, and then we still hold our place, you don't have any money to fight us with. That's and they're not that open about it, but that's the reality of it. And a good friend of mine, it's too long a story to tell, but he had an IRS agent come to his business who did an audit, and she told him when she got done that he owed $150,000. And he literally started laughing, and he says, I'm just complimented, and I'm amazed, because we don't make anywhere close to that, let alone owe that. He said, nevertheless, that's the way it is. And so he said, well, I'm going to appeal it. Well, he had to take it through the IRS. And he ended up getting an attorney, and he was paying an attorney to sit by him while he was, you know, arguing about this in front of their administrative people. And of course, he was paying for the attorney. And, you know, they got this deal. Well, finally they said, okay, well, look, we'll cut you a deal just to get rid of this problem. I'm sure you're sick of it as we are. If you give us $75,000, we'll be okay. No, I'm not going to do it. Heck no, as we said earlier. So it came to 30,000. It came to 15,000. It came to 10,000. But all this is happening, negotiations, not the same day. It's happening gathering after gathering. And finally they said, we're going to make you a 10,000. You know that we've really reduced what you owed, but we'll settle for it. And he said, heck no. And his attorney said to him, I almost said his name, can we step outside and talk for a minute? And the attorney says, I will fight this as long as you want me to fight it. He said, but take the offer, because it's going to cost you a lot more than $10,000 for me to fight this. And you can minimize your losses, pay the money, and then be done with it. So my friend went back in and said, I will pay you $10,000 as soon as I get your letter that says if I pay $10,000, all of this is cleared up. And they said, okay, fine. His letter never came. Never came, never came, never came. I helped him move out of his business because he was so afraid that everything that he owned was going to be taken. I helped him move out of his business into the basement of his home. And the letter never came. The letter never came. And so Orrin Hatch, when he was senator, contacted some of these people that had had troubles with the IRS and said, I would like to bring your case forward in part of the Senate hearings about some of the atrocious behavior of the IRS. And my friend sat down and wrote him an essay that was magnificent and turned it in. Nothing ever happened with Orrin Hatch. But as soon as it had been turned in, the IRS started contacting him for $150,000 again. I mean, it's like a turncoat was representing us in the Senate. So anyway, these kind of things, when they do it all within their own internal organization, and I could give you examples of things that it was passed recently, well, it was a few years ago in Utah about if we got our federal land back, and they created a Department of Lands, a state department, within our state. It was a mini BLM, and they were given all authority to create the ordinances, to enforce the ordinances, and adjudicate the ordinances, and never went outside their department. And I've got an hour-and-a-half presentation on that if you're ever interested in hearing that sometime, but that's how things happen so often. And it's absolutely a violation of the original intent of the American Founding Fathers if this is the way it's carried out. So yes, ma'am.
So any of the bills that have been passed by the Utah State Legislature that builds in administrative law judges is not constitutional?
That would be a pretty good baseline position and understanding. The administrative law thing is a violation of the separation of powers. See you guys. Well, we don't want to offend you too bad, but no. I wish I had that excuse. At any rate, so really the way they're doing things is a violation of separation of powers. There's there's a lawmaking group, there's a group that enforces or carries out the law, and there's a group that can judge if it's being enforced properly. If the same group, let me just read you something that James Madison said. I think this will make the point sufficiently, although what I'm saying here is not a widely held position. Whoops, what did I do wrong? Anyway, here is this is on page 88 of my book, in case anybody's got the book at home. Madison said this in Federalist 47. So you can go home and read that if you don't have my book. Not selling it right now or anything, but in Federalist 47, he said, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So he's saying if you roll all these things together, you ain't getting freedom and justice. What you're getting is some form of tyranny. And so, that's a Federalist 47 thing. You can read it any time. But it's so rarely held, and people will poo-poo this to the nth degree. And depending on how you handle it, you're probably much more diplomatic than I am. But the fact of the matter is that they're creating a form of tyranny. And remember, in the Declaration of Independence, this is our promise. This was the baseline premise of what government is to be. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Mentions a few, and then it says it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. The Founding Fathers clearly understood what their source of rights were. This natural law thing, if you want to read what Blackstone said or what Locke said, we'll quote a few of these when we do get to it next time, I'm thinking, where you'll find that these guys referred these things back to the most organic laws that were created can be basically tied back to God. Because, and they say, for example, in Volume 1, Blackstone says, this law against murder has its origins in the divine. And it's justifiable because that's his law. And so we create laws against murder. And people often say to me, oh, you can't legislate morality. And I say, well, if there isn't a moral element in law, we maybe ought to revisit it. Because if it's not moral, we've got a big problem. I was going to spend a little bit of time tonight, and we might yet at some point, talking about this little tiny book that I absolutely believe you should have, called The Law. It's by Frederick Bastiat. And it was written in 1850, a little Frenchman that wrote it. He loved the American founding fathers. He had the highest regard for them. He had some grief with them on 2 points. One was slavery, and the other one was the inappropriate use of tariffs. Tariffs are constitutional when used properly. But there had been some really egregious things that ultimately led to the Civil War that had happened, okay? And so Bastiat talks about the origins of law and how it comes basically from natural law. And if we don't tie it back to that, sometimes we get on shaky grounds, okay? So this is a little book, as you can say, you can read it before you go to bed, and you'll cheer all the way through it. I mean, this little guy, he died in 1850 also. He was, like I say, a Frenchman, a philosopher, a politician, an economist. He wrote some really powerful stuff. But his biggest point in writing this was to oppose communism. because it was sweeping across Europe at that particular time. And of course, that's exactly what we have going on in America. They call it something a little less, a little less threatening than that, but nevertheless, it's the same. And we're going to cover some of those as we go through this, because this property thing ties back to that.
Okay, so I have one more question then.
Okay.
So if administrative law judges are unconstitutional, then wouldn't the whole title for our Utah Administrative Rulemaking Act be?
It would be questionable, wouldn't it? It needs to be revisited. Our administrative law stuff is going on, it steps over and they say, well, we're just trying to lighten the load in our judge situations, and we can get these people and get them trained and they can sign things off. And the point of the matter is, though, that they oftentimes are just enforcing, pretend laws, and they're getting their fines, and everybody goes, they need to be revisited. You're probably not going to change that tonight.
I think it's fair to say administrative rules are not laws. It's not legislation, period. So yeah, in theory, you could nullify and push back against anything that's strictly an administrative rule, and you would kind of push back to, well, here's the law behind the rule, and they try to massage using the rules to change the actual wording of the original law. So, but if you don't push back against the administrative rules and you just follow it, then it just stands naturally, right? But yes, it's not legislation. It wasn't written by legislative power.
What about codes?
What you mean, like city codes? Well, that's a different question. I mean, there's a legislative branch of the cities, and so long as they're in pursuance of the constitutional powers, it's right. If it follows the same pattern there, yeah. But city codes also must fall within constitutional limits as well, because they inherit the limitations and the powers of the state.
Here's the deal, and we'll get to this at some point. I hope that Utah Constitution recognizes the United States Constitution as supreme. And so it's a kind of a cascading effect that says we can do these things because it follows these things. Again, though, remember, the Constitution only delegates certain authority to do certain things to the national government, but the whole premise of it is the purpose of government is to secure our rights. And those rights go back to, John Locke's statements about them. He didn't create them, and Blackstone didn't create them, but he talks about God and what he allows man to do in their law. They tie it back to the laws of nature and nature's God. Now, wait a minute. I haven't read that before, have I? Yeah, you probably have. And so that's where we keep forgetting, when you read this, the purpose of government is to secure God-given rights. It doesn't say for the national government or for the state government or for the local government. It doesn't, or the county government, whatever. That's the purpose of government as a general term. Government is there to protect our God-given rights. And we've often left that because now we're creating a new way to redistribute wealth, for example. And that's a socialistic, communistic perspective. Okay, these are food for thought. I mean, to start moving in the right direction, that we might grow into restoring proper government. Okay, so executive branch reviewing their own actions, it's kind of self-serving. You're maybe going to be at risk. This idea of judicial review is supposed to take it out of the executive's hands that is doing it for a self-serving purpose and take it into a situation that's a neutral ground for discussing these things. So the courts very much should be a part of this. Okay, I hope I can get through the Kelo case in just a few minutes, and then we'll call it good tonight. Okay, so you got to have that impartiality and that ability to have a true review to ensure fairness, not just going down the hall to the guys that are in the same pocket under the same administrator that is carrying out this against you. Okay, so I read you something out of the 47th Federalist paper that I had on a slide, and I'll just remind you again. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether one, a few, or many, whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Probably good that we reemphasized it in 2 places anyway. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So they got to pay a fair price for property taken for public use. We have a couple of friends that live near us that the city wanted a portion of their property to put a street through. And they said, fine, we'll sell it to you. We just want market price. Fair price must be paid. What about that? Just compensation. And the city said, we'll get an appraisal. Well, these guys didn't just fall off the turnip wagon. And so they didn't just take what the city brought in. And it was egregiously below what fair market price was. They said, well, we have an appraiser. He's a certified appraiser. So they did a FOIA thing, Freedom of Information Act. They got the communication between the appraiser and the city. And what they discovered was the appraiser said, in essence, without going into all the details, how much do you want to pay for it? And the city said, well, this sounds good to us. And so they came back with that price. Well, these friends of ours went out and got their own independent appraisal. And now it's my daddy's bigger than your daddy kind of thing. And so they were going to go to court over this thing. Now, there is a way to get some of this adjudicated through a ombudsman for property in the state of Utah, but we won't go into all those details. But the fact of the matter is, they had the FOIA information that said, come up with this number. And the appraiser did. And so the guys said, we're going to do this in court. And the city said, oh, we don't really need the property that bad now. So anyway, those are the kind of things that sometimes somebody's got to say, this is not right. And the Fifth Amendment says it can't be taken without just compensation. And so, but they do it all the time. And we had a similar kind of thing when they were trying to take some of our property for a sidewalk and curb and gutter. And they said, we've got a right-of-way to do this. I said, oh, really? Let's see it. Let's see where it's registered and certified in the property rights that are in this. They didn't have it. They were just telling us they did. And so we don't have curb and gutter that's been taken away from us, which, by the way, their rule was that if they took it, we had to pay for the improvements. Okay, the heck you say. The little boy's not here anymore, is he? Okay, so anyway, so this is the kind of shenanigans that happens in some of these local government things. And so it's really, really, you know, if you were an 80-year-old grandma and oh, the city said you've got right away, I guess you can take it. We're not that far from 80, Tamara. But the fact is that people just need to understand that government is our servant. And it's become far different than that in recent times. Okay, so if property is taken for public use, you got to pay your full market value for the individual losing the property. Okay, so some of the things that are happening are rather arbitrary nowadays. And one of the things that's become popular is taking property to improve tax collections for a municipality. Now, how many, you know that churches don't pay taxes, right? Okay. So if this were carried out to the nth degree, if you really needed to improve your taxes, you could seize the church property and put a roller skating rink in there that you charge for, and that would improve your revenue stream. But it would violate the First Amendment right to worship, okay? But that's a worst case scenario. They're paying no taxes. If we took it, we could get some tax base out of it. So some of them want to improve the municipality's tax collection, or even give it to private developers that will increase the value and you will collect more property tax. So this is a really strange perversion of this. And when we get done with Kilo here, we're going to take a break until next time we get together. You get a whole month probably to relax. By the way, there's a test when we get done with this, so I just don't. The test is, are you going to be free or not? We used to do a Constitution commemoration, and we got a quiz to every single student in our county. We created a quiz, 16,000 of those quizzes for every student. It was very simple. It was based on the Constitution, 13 questions. I gave them the article, section, and clause that the answer was in. You could talk to your parents, and I wanted them to talk to their parents because their parents might learn something. And then if they took their finished quiz over to the Wendy's, you know, the hamburger place, they'd give them a free Frosty. And the guy we worked with had four Wendy's establishments in our community. He was jumping up and down excited because if the time somebody came in and got a Frosty, they bought burgers and fries. And so his business, I'll do this all day long, he was saying. But yeah, if there's a test, it should be a test that we're able to go look, article, section, and clause about what things are. And ours was just a simple test. Kids that were in second grade could take it home and have their mom and dad help them with it, okay? Kids in high school had to have their mom and dad help them with it, but the fact is that that's what our intent was. Okay, so they're going to allow private developers in some instance to take property that the city has seized, and then they're going to make a bigger tax base, okay? So I use this as an example, a good example of that example, the Kelo case versus New London, Connecticut. This was a 5-4 Supreme Court decision that went upside down and backwards. It was horrid. This is, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, okay? And it had an outcry across the nation because it was so wrong. Some communities responded by making illegal what the Supreme Court says was legal. Utah had already, in a step, and I'm giving you an overhang the market thing because we only got a few minutes and I don't have a lot of time to talk about it. Utah had taken some good steps to begin with, but after the case was done, they rolled those back. You mean we can get away with this? Are you kidding me? No. So here's the case. There was an eminent domain seizure that they wanted to do. There was some homes that were very, very desirable location on the ocean front. How many of you would like to have oceanfront property? Yeah, me too. This had been in their families for generations. These guys had a little sandy beach house that they could go to for their summer vacation with their grandkids. Okay, so there's a number of homes that were involved and all this kind of stuff. So see, if you go back here to this beginning, it says Kelo et al. That means Kelo and all the other people. Suzette Kelo was the lead scoundrel on this in the eyes of the city, okay? Eminent domain seizure, transfer land from private owners to another private owner. Okay, private owner to private owner. This wasn't for a city or something, for a street or something. This was for somebody else to use what they wanted. They said they were trying to further their economic tax base by doing development. So you think they got a resort area that's got this beachfront property, and they're going to come in and put this nice hotel with swimming pools and restaurants, and they could collect taxes for the occupation fees, that all of these things that you pay extra for. Oh, the hotel room was $90 a night, but your bill is $126. What? How did it go from 90 to 126? It's all these other fees that they put in there that the municipality is doing. Okay. So they were going to improve their tax base. The Supreme Court held that under the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment, private redevelopment plans are permissible public use because it was going to improve the tax base for the municipality. So, private property was condemned by the city of New London, Connecticut. They came in, and all these folks that had these generational beach houses, they condemned them all, okay? This was for a comprehensive redevelopment plan. That's legalese for we're going to steal your property. Okay. So the court held that the use of eminent domain for economic development did not violate the public use clauses of the state and federal constitutions. So the court held, going on, if a legislative body has found that an economic project will create new jobs, increase tax and other city revenues, and revitalize a depressed urban area, the project serves a public purpose which qualifies as public use. Again, these are weasel words that the Supreme Court came up with. Okay? So it's not unconstitutional for the government to take private property from one individual or corporation and give it to another. And what you're going to find that it really was a gift. Did you have something, Enoch? It's horrific. Theft.
You will own nothing like it.
Yeah. By the way, did you know that the CEO of the World Economic Forum lost his job because of an Epstein connection? Isn't that exciting? See, it never happens in America. But we got Norwegians and we got diplomats and we got princes and everybody that are getting their butts kicked about this, but it didn't happen here. Did you want to say something
Yeah,
else?
so I was just going to say this sounds like almost it's the a piece of what's going on in our cities right now with the with all the special districts and how
True.
they create these districts for the purpose of giving them to developers, and the justification, you know, is, well, the tax money is going to come later.
The
And,
private developers get to go develop it, make all the profit, and oh, by the way, we'll probably get some tax benefit.
and they actually even promise tax money to the developers later, aren't they doing that?
Yeah, so they started, well, first of all, they changed the law from local district to special district.
Yep.
So they could enact all of these special districts. Then they created the authority districts to move these special districts under the authority districts that the private developers own. So you have the Utah Inland Port, you have MIDA, you have the Point,
Yeah.
you have the Lake Authority, you have the Fair Park Authority, and
How does, what's Vineyard? And what's the name of that place just down by Lehigh?
isn't it Utah City?
Maybe it is now.
But you have the Point.
Yeah, yeah.
But these private developers are getting paid up front through tax dollars to,
So everybody gets it except for they get some moolah, but the taxpayer bears the price.
and if they don't follow through with the project, like there's one up in Colville that they ended up declaring bankruptcy on, and the people are left holding the bag. The developers declaring bankruptcy,
Yeah.
and
They ran with the money. I'll give you an example, and this goes back. This goes back nearly 60 years, so I apologize if it seems like ancient history, but to me it was just yesterday. When I finished high school, a friend of mine, a guy that was in high school, his dad bought him property out here in the southwest end of the valley. Some of you may live on it. And it was just sagebrush and weeds. There was a lot of property, lots of acreage. And they immediately put it into CRP, crop rotation program. Okay. So the federal government was paying them not to farm it. And so this guy went to high school, never made a payment on this. He paid it all out of the CRP funds. And when it was paid off, they developed it. And they probably put, what temple is that over there? Was that South Jordan? That may have been on that property. So might the, what's the one that's nearby? I mean, there's one on every corner now, but how? No. It may have been some of those too. But this guy became a multi-million dollar heir. I mean, yeah, he held on to it for a while, but he had no risk. He was being paid out of federal taxpayer funds to not farm the land. And he then developed it after it was his. Okay. So anyway, getting back to this kilo thing, there's so many things that we could do. Did you have some other additional you want to say?
Yeah, well,
about it?
just final conclusion on that. This sounds like the judicial battle of our lifetime when I think about this, because it is they've ruled against the very essence of private property is
Well,
what they've done, right? And so
yeah.
like as they continue to take and create these economic projects and people lose sections of private property, you know, for whatever, these are the kinds of like this needs to be challenged, definitely.
Well, but absolutely, and that's what happened in 44 states. They made laws. Utah actually made it easier to seize property after this case, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I was going to, but we'll do it later. I was going to review the idea of where this theft of property came from, the basis of things that are, the whole fundamental doctrines that allow this kind of thing, and how opposed the founding fathers were to that, and how opposed their mentors were, the Blackstone, the Blackstones and the Locks of the world. And everything that we've got goes back to this ancient law. I mean, you can go back even to Alfred the Great and his common law that he documented. But Americans have been immersed, and you're going to find that the 10th point of the Communist Manifesto is one of the big keys of this. We are teaching our children these false doctrines as though they were true, and by so doing, the next generation doesn't even know it's not okay. Okay.
Right.
So anyway, I get a few more minutes because and that's all I'm going to do tonight. But okay, so it's not unconstitutional to take this property, give it to somebody else. If the government does so to put property into a use that would generate higher tax revenue. Now, using my example about churches, well, we could seize all of them and put them to a better tax revenue base. But there's some other principles involved, so they don't do that. So, after the victory, the City of New London announced the plans to charge the residents of the homes for back rent for the 5 years since they began the condemnation things. So they're adding insult to injury. We're going to take your property, and by the way, you owe us for the last 5 years. And they said that the residents have been on the property, so they owed tens of thousands of dollars of rent to use the property that should have been given up at their first whim. Okay. The redeveloper was to get 91 acres of waterfront tract of land for $1 per year from the city. And this is kind of where you're talking about some of these development things. They get them for nothing. This is like this guy that I went to high school with. They got all this land out here. You know, 60 years ago, this really was a wasteland. Okay, so sorry. But now it's a huge, revenue stream for cities. People made fortune off of the development, and of course they had to put sewer and water and power in, of course. Okay, so the developer was unable to obtain financing, like this one you talked about out in, was it Colville? It's like some financier looked at it and says, we're not sure you can carry out the project, whatever. They may not, they may have been a couple of guys that put curb and gutter in and decided they were going to put this whole development in. They said, no, you're not qualified. I don't know what resulted in them not being able to get financing. The project was abandoned. The original Kelo property is a vacant lot today. They took the houses out. There was no tax revenue generated for the city. After Hurricane Irene in 2011, the closed New London redevelopment area was turned into a dump because they were putting all the broken stuff there and piling it up. Okay. It cost New London $78 million. The public reaction was pretty unfavorable. President Bush issued a restrictive executive order. The U.S. Congress has considered but has not passed restrictive legislation, and 44 states have now passed laws limiting the seizure of private property for private development. Okay, now here we are in Utah. So I always try to throw in Utah Constitution and stuff because that's where we are. Okay, the state led the nation in eminent domain reform with pre-Kelo legislation that completely removed eminent domain authority for blight. Unfortunately, the state became the first to roll back reform by reinstating a more limited blight authority and allowing the condemnation of a neighborhood by a neighborhood majority vote. Okay, if I can come in, and because I'm an eloquent silver-tongued devil, I convince all you guys that that guy's house ought to be condemned. Let's condemn his house. Come on, come on. I don't know the specifics about that, but very much could have been related to that. And
They started lighting specific
they did, they
areas,
do.
and then next thing you know, it's just like this, oh, convenient
Little square,
outline
yeah.
of what they wanted to do with it.
But think of the metro, what do they call that train that runs through here? Front Runner, holy Hannah. I mean, if you knew, there's a guy that, I gotta try to remember his name right now, but he did a research on this, and for what went into that project, and now this was a few years ago, I don't know if Lexus is still a good car or not, I certainly don't have one, but he said every 4 years you could buy everybody that was using the north-south corridor a new Lexus for what it cost to put in that thing. Everybody that was going north-south would have a new Lexus every 4 years because of what they did to everybody. One individual, I've been four-wheeling since I was 11 years old, and there was a guy down on about 13th South that I used to use to work on four-wheel drive stuff and build machines. He told me when they went through, he lost for the period of time, and it was like 2 years, I think, that they had his business really restricted. People couldn't get access to his business. He lost something like 93% of his income for those years that they had him blocked off. I mean, and he says, I got guys to pay. You know, what am I going to do? It's bad every way you look at it. Okay, so we're going to come back, because it's after 8:30, at another time and talk about where does this nonsense about seizing private property for the greater good come from. And we're going to find out that it's diabolical. And the devil has many minions out there working things for him, and it really destroys our peace, our prosperity, and our God-given rights. So with that, say again. Explain how they're using that. Well, yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the way they're doing it, but it is a wrong thing. And I had a business account with a partner of mine, and we'd left some money. The partnership broke up, and he died. Okay, and I didn't go down and pull the money out of the account, and they sent it to the state. And so I'm not sure exactly if that's totally related to this, but it's the same concept. The state owns everything. Sorry, you own nothing and you'll be happy, right? Okay. Unless you're the CEO of World Economic Forum and you get fired because of your dalliances with Jeffrey Epstein's crew. Okay, we're on slide 146 and we've got to go through 197. And so, but we started on number 60. So we have made progress. We've made 86 slides in this get together, but we've got maybe that amount to do. So Enoch, do you want to seize control of this
Sure thing.
rowdy group?
Yep.
Okay, so this, the taking of property, private property, how does this work with the public-private partnerships, where the state partners with private developers?
That's called fascism.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's fascism. It's a public partnership that it goes right back to Mussolini and Hitler's crowd.
So it's not constitutional.
No, it's a violation of that, and the public-private things. The government has a role, and anytime they go beyond that, we're on thin ice. I'll just give you an example. Everybody says, "Oh, well, garbage should be picked up by the city, shouldn't it?" I mean, that's where it is mostly in Utah. When we lived in Colorado Springs, it was a private enterprise to pick up your garbage. And there were all of these competing businesses. I mean, I'd get woke up with pounding on my door. I'm still laying there in bed. Oh, who the heck's at my door at this hour? And I'd go there, and it's a garbage man. Can I take your garbage? Yeah, I mean, they were hungry. They wanted it. They got paid for what they picked up. And I had a whole bunch one time. I had not just my regular garbage cans, but I had a whole bunch of, my wife doesn't remember this because she thinks I save everything. But at this point, I'd saved probably 40 cases of business material that was written material that was part of my job and everything like that, but it was no longer needed. I had about 40 cases of those there. And this guy saw them there in the garage and he says, "Is that garbage too?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And he said, "Can I take it too?" I says, "Well, right now I don't have time to carry it out. I'll carry it out." I mean, it was a private enterprise and they were hungry to do business. And so a lot of these things that are happening that are automatically considered by most of us, it ought to be a municipality that does it. There's other cities and states that are doing it far differently than we do. And it should be considered because the public-private sector oftentimes is rife with, shall we say, corruption. I mean, I'm not saying every one of them is a Somali welfare case, but it is similar. It starts to be, "Oh, you need your kids taken care of? Hey, I got an organization that'll do that. Send me money." You know, it's not supposed to be that way.
And I've done a few presentations on public-private partnerships related to the definition of republic.
Yeah.
Like, there's a few ways you can define how that's unconstitutional. Like, you know, if you're trying to explain to a city council person, for example, you know, how that's unconstitutional. And there's a variety of principles where boundaries, right? A republic is defined by the boundaries, whether it's geographical boundaries or the boundaries between public and private. And the fact that you cannot consolidate power in a few, and when you mix private and public together, you are giving, you know, to whoever the private people are, you're giving them the power of law, right? So when they mix public and private, you get to play this game where, well, sometimes we have the power of law, therefore you do what we say, and other times we're private, you can't tell us what to do, right? And it completely mixes that. But I think I could probably find some of those presentations and send you a link, or maybe I'll have to look up where some of that is. But the public-private boundaries is the clear distinction. And if you look through the state constitution, and I've looked through other states too, there's different forms where they actually enforce that. Like I think Michigan had, you cannot take public funds for, you know, private development infrastructure projects, or, right? They sometimes get a little more specific, but they're all defining, they're executing different versions of that boundary between public and private when they do that. And I think Utah's free market clause is exactly that. And there's like 4 or 5 different sections in Utah's constitution about this public funds. You know, if you are a public officer and you take funds for private use, it's a felony. I think that, I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's in the state constitution specifically. So yeah, so unconstitutional, definitely. The fact that the governor has a website will help you start a public-private partnership is so egregious in the face of a republic. It's just raw communism.
But
right
what
there.
has Spencer Cox done that was not?
Right.
I mean, when the encroachment begins, it's hard to stop it. I mean, well, we'll just take a little more here, a little more there, and pretty soon you'll have stuff like this guy, and we're going to talk about him next time. And we're going to talk about the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, when the encroachment begins, I mean, how we stop it is first we all have to remember the rules. That's why we have to read and reread, and we have to ask, well, why does separation of powers matter? Well, the definition of tyranny, you put all 3 branches in one. Now we have tyranny. That's why we separate the powers. Once you know the principle behind that, then in the city, someone can say, hey, mayor, that little project you started, you know, they're actually creating law and they're doing these, you know, you can recognize the principle and when it's applied. And that's what we have to see at the local level. We have to see these principles, not just, you know, when we say we support the Constitution, that's federal, it's far away, you know, it's for the United States. But if we learn the principles, we can apply them locally.
And what we've done this before, but we'll probably end up doing it again. We've done, I don't know if you remember, but we did a parallel between the Bill of Rights at the federal level and what Article 1 of the Utah Constitution says. They're almost an overlay of each other. I mean, and the Utah Constitution does specifically recognize as the United States Constitution is
right.
supreme law. But in addition to that, it says even more specifically than the United States Constitution, the Utah Constitution more specifically protects private property.
Right.
Article 1, Section 1. We're going to talk about that next time we get together. But it very specifically protects private property, which is interesting. We had a state legislator in our area that served for 30 years. And he got up in one of the meetings that says, there's no right to private property. And you, have you not read the Utah Constitution? Let's get Article 1, Section 1 out.
The
of
very
Utah.
first line.
Yeah, and it's so amazing that these guys serve in the legislature for decades and they don't have a clue what their limits and bounds are. So it's an uphill battle, and most of the people that get elected are more interested in the handshakes and kisses that they get than they are in what's really correct. So anyway,
All right. Yeah, we should wrap up.
it.
You guys are hanging around with us late here, but lots of great questions today. I appreciate that, and we're struggling to kind of keep up with the
at
people
times,
online.
But it's fun.
Yeah,
do it
definitely fun. And
anyway.
the questions, though, they bring out these good points because they come from our real experiences, and that's really what we want to do: is take these things and apply them as a solution, which is kind of the whole point of like this program that we came up with. I'll give you one of these if you don't have one, by the way. Yep. And we want to take these principles and make them applicable
Bring them to
daily.
life. Bring them to life.
And then in our communities, we need enough people who can be a resource to our representatives. When our representatives want to do the right thing, but they don't know how, because just, yeah, that I agree with, right? But hey, if we have even one representative in a small town that wants to do the right thing, it's just missing some information, can do everything for that community.
I think at the local levels, I think a lot more want to do the right thing. They don't necessarily
Is my point.
know.
Correct.
But here's the
Correct.
problem with the local level. They bring all the United Nations developed plans and programs in. It's already written up. You guys don't have to go out and take this to a lawyer. Why don't you just enact it?
Right.
And they do.
Just like with what's coming with the Olympics.
Yeah.
They put it in the contract that the state of Utah signed, that they electrify and go green and all of these things if they wanted the games. And of course,
And
even
most of
the-
us don't, by the way. Sorry.
That's a tough battle for sure, because it's this billion-dollar contract, right, that the state signs. A lot of money, a lot of power behind it. But in theory, the state cannot enter into a contract that ultimately forces a city to violate the property rights of its citizens, for example. And I imagine in those cases, if someone actually pushed back, the money would come on the side and someone would get convinced and bought out or something like that. And then, because if people don't have standing or they don't have a complaint, then there's no problem to solve. So, if they can solve it another way. But overall, anyway, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And if you want to hang out afterwards and chat more and ask more questions, of course, that's okay for a little bit. But we'll go ahead and sign off tonight. And we'll see you, I guess, next month. We'll continue with the Fifth Amendment to do part 3 at this point. And, I love that we nitpick and learn so much in the details. That's really good. And we've got this forever up on YouTube now as well. And thank you for coming. Have a good night.